And welcome back to the show. As our viewers are aware, building new venues for sports teams can be a major political and financial battle for many teams and municipalities. A weak economy only makes the battle more contentious. And while several teams and cities are currently in the midst of that battle, two major deals have been reached in the NFL, one in San Francisco and the other in Minnesota. And to help us understand the implications of these new deals, we're pleased to have with us sports banker Mitchell Zeitz for our State of Sports discussion brought to you by SAP. Mitchell, good to have you here. Let's kind of break it down for us. What are the major differences between these two deals?
Sure. Well, the major differences are you see the San Francisco 49ers putting in a much more significant contribution into their stadium, although the Vikings is very large from a historical standpoint. The Niners is outsized compared to the Vikings. And really the reason for that is because is the corporate market significantly different in the Bay Area versus Minnesota. So when you're talking about naming rights, corporate sponsorships, premium seating, whether it's suites or the new theater boxes or club seats, a much stronger market in the Bay Area. Secondly, you have a larger population and more wealth. So from a pure fan perspective, they can afford higher ticket prices. There are just more fans there, to purchase the tickets. So what you really have in that market in San Francisco versus Minnesota is, higher risk, higher reward. You have a much more significant contribution, but the upside is higher. And so obviously that will play out over time in all these sales, whether they're seat license sales or ticket sales or corporate sales, and you'll have a higher revenue situation in San Francisco and obviously a higher expense as it relates to the stadium.
And this is a record amount, for the 49ers deal, that is, for private investment into its own stadium. And that's been kind of a trend anyway. We saw it here in New York with both the Jets and the Giants putting private money into their stadiums. What is the driving force behind that trend of more private money in stadiums? Well,
there are several things that are driving that now compared to historically. One, of course, is the recession and taxpayers just saying no more. We just can't put in 80–90% of the money anymore. We're not going to do it. So that's probably the biggest one. Secondly, just the costs are higher. So football stadiums that used to be $500 million are now $1 billion. Ballparks that were $350 million are now $500 million. Arenas were $200, now they're $400. So the costs are higher, and the public sector isn't going to put that money in. The third difference, really, compared to historically, is the leverage. The teams really don't have the leverage anymore that they used to have. So back in the days when I started, too long ago to remember, you had teams looking and threatening to move to other cities. And, separate from LA still having a football situation, you don't have that type of leverage that teams can hold over cities anymore because they're all kind of, we're at the end here. The cities have gotten new stadiums. So you don't really have teams threatening to move. And if they do want to move to a smaller market, which they have in the past, media has become such a bigger player in everything that you don't want to give up the media dollars to move into a smaller market, even if you can get a better ballpark deal. So all of those are really driving what's happening here with Minnesota and San Francisco.
Well, the LA market has been tied to certain teams, certainly not San Francisco, but they were tied to Minnesota. How much do you think it helped finally get a deal done with more public money in the Minneapolis area because of the fact that the Wilfs had said, there's a chance we might move, even if it was a hollow threat?
It probably affected some legislators, and I'd say a small number, but I'd say overall, as opposed to maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago when people cared, the way we live nowadays and what's happened economically, I don't think it really mattered much at all across the board. And that's why you see the Vikings, who had an original deal of like 200 of private investment a couple years ago for an open-air stadium, end up at 477.
What do you think's more important, Mitchell? Do you think the corporate demographics, or do you think the personal net worth? In other words, is the number of rich people living in the area more important? Because both of these teams now, when you look at the number of sports teams relative to the number of corporations in their market, they're both below the league average. Yet Minnesota is a very strong football market. They have great merchandise sales relative to the size of the market. And obviously, the Golden State area has a lot of wealthy people.
All right, that's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer for that, but I will tell you this. If you tell me that both teams are going to sell seat licenses, the upfront payments for seats, and I don't know that to be the case in Minnesota, but if they're both going to do that and they're both trying to hit similar numbers, then I'll say the fan demographics are more important because they're the ones buying those. If that's not the case, then I would probably say the corporate market in both of those cities is more important. But I don't know that there's an exact answer to that. It really depends how they're selling.
I'm sure you'll be sad to never watch a football game in Candlestick again. Is that
yes,
fair
absolutely,
to say? Yeah.
Yes.
They moved to Santa Clara, about 45 miles south. How much do you think that helps this situation for them?
I don't know that it really matters. I think in terms of, you're talking about the Silicon Valley buyer,
right,
I'm sure when you say that. I think they would have gone in either case, although granted, Candlestick was very tough to get into, and then there were a lot of things going on once you were there, and then it was tough to get out of. But it probably helps a little bit, but it's probably not as much as you would think. I think they would go anyway. Now that the team's winning, it certainly helps, for sure.
How important is it going to be for the owners of the 49ers to be able to have non-NFL events at their new stadium? Because, you know, obviously, if you count preseason games, it's only 10 games, and they're putting a lot of their own money in. Is that going to be a key to whether or not the deal is going to work out for them?
I would say it's a key from a PR standpoint in terms of selling it to the public, which they did. I think it's a key from the city standpoint in terms of utilizing the stadium and maximizing the use of the stadium. In terms of pure economics, it's probably not as great because when you think of the national TV deal and ticket revenues and all those things, they dwarf the other events. But so I think it was probably more of a part of the sales.
The key is really going to be the PSLs, right? That's going to be the key for the 49ers.
Yeah, and that world's changed. I mean, none of us knew that we're working on this, 4 or 5 years ago. We looked at all the seat license programs around the NFL, in particular the NFL, and all of a sudden Dallas came along and kind of broke that mold. And now the 49ers are following in their footsteps, and we don't know who else will. I mean, maybe the Vikings will, maybe they won't. But as you can see, the NFL teams are willing to put in more money. My sense is that some of that is on the backs of seat licenses, no doubt in San Francisco's case.
Final question, Mitchell. Given the success of Jerry Jones with the Cowboys and the PSLs and the Jets and the Giants, how much should the Niners, and if they decide to do it, the Vikings, have learned from the PSLs and the process and how to best monetize their new stadium?
I think they have to figure out, they have to balance really how much they need to build their stadium versus what happens to the fans that have been there for a long time. So if you have fans on the first level and they've been there for 40, 50, 60 years, and now all of a sudden you're being asked to pay a $50,000 per seat license. That's $200,000 for 4 people. They have to balance that versus how much money they have to put in. So I'm sure they've learned and tried to figure out, what pockets of the building they can charge more for and less. So it's probably like a, price gradation, but beyond that, it's more of an issue of how they have to deal with their particular situation and how much money they're putting in.
Sounds like a real balancing act, and in some cases, a really tough call. Mitchell, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of our show. For Michael Ozanian, I'm Bob Lorenz. We would like to thank all of our guests, and we thank you as well for watching, as we look forward to seeing you next time on Forbes Sports Money. Take care.